I never imagined I'd be telling this story, but sometimes life takes unexpected turns that force you to share the darkest moments of your past. I'm Julia, and until recently, I lived what many would consider a dream life. My husband Max and I owned a beautiful house. The kind with a wraparound porch and windows that caught the sunset just right. I loved my job as a college science teacher. There was something deeply satisfying about watching young minds grasp complex concepts for the first time. Max would often tease me about how animated I'd get when talking about my students' breakthroughs. He'd say, "Jules, your eyes light up more talking about chemical reactions than they do when you look at me." Max was successful in his own right. He owned a real estate agency that had grown impressively over the years. He had a natural talent for the business, understanding both properties and people in a way that made him stand out in the industry. "It's simple," he'd say. "Just treat people the way you'd want to be treated." If only everyone in our lives shared that philosophy. Our family circle was relatively small. My father, a lawyer, lived in another state, which meant our visits were limited to major holidays and the occasional long weekend. On Max's side, there was his father Jack, also a lawyer, and his sister Daisy. And Daisy, well, she was something else entirely. I remember the first time I met her. She swept into the restaurant where Max had arranged our introduction, designer handbag swinging from her arm, fresh from finalizing her second divorce. "Another one bites the dust," she'd announced, laughing as she ordered the most expensive wine on the menu. "But don't worry, sweetie, he's paying for it all." That was Daisy's approach to life: marry rich, divorce richer. She managed to do it 3 times, each marriage more lucrative than the last. Well, almost. The first 2 divorces left her with hefty alimony payments, which she burned through in record time. Designer clothes, exotic vacations, spa treatments, nothing was too expensive for Daisy. "Life's too short to count pennies," she'd say, swiping a credit card that was probably already maxed out. But her third marriage? That's where her luck ran out. Her husband was smarter than the others, or at least had better lawyers. He had her sign a prenuptial agreement that she probably didn't even read. When that marriage ended, Daisy was left with nothing but her expensive tastes and an empty bank account. That's when Max stepped in. "She's my sister, Jules," he'd say whenever I questioned why we were paying her rent. "I can't just let her live on the street." So he covered her apartment, her utilities, most of her bills. I watched month after month as my husband supported his sister's lifestyle, unable to say no to family. Living with Daisy as a sister-in-law was like walking on eggshells, except the eggshells were designer brands and covered in champagne. From the moment I entered the family, there was tension between us that you could cut with a knife. "Oh, look who's here, our favorite professor," Daisy would announce whenever I walked into a room, her voice dripping with mockery. "Coming to teach us all how to live properly?" I never understood why she took such pleasure in antagonizing me. Maybe it was because I represented everything she despised: hard work, education, earning your own way in life. The tension would reach its peak at family gatherings, especially once Daisy had a few drinks in her. I remember one particularly uncomfortable Christmas party. Daisy was on her 4th martini, holding court in the living room like some self-proclaimed queen of cunning. "You want to know how to really succeed in life," she announced to everyone and no one in particular. "Watch and learn from a master." "Daisy, maybe you should slow down," Max suggested gently. "Oh, hush, little brother," she waved him off. "I'm educating your wife here. See, Julia, you spent all those years getting your fancy degree, and for what? I've never worked a day in my life, and I've had more luxury than you'll ever see." She loved telling stories about her conquests, especially when she was drinking. "Any man I want," she'd boast, throwing back another martini. "I could take any man right out of his happy little family. Done it twice already. It's like taking candy from a baby." The worst part was watching other people at these gatherings, especially younger women, actually listening to her like she was sharing some ancient wisdom. "You don't need books, honey," she'd say to anyone who'd listen. "You need strategy. These rich men? They're all the same. Wave a pretty face at them, and they'll forget their own names. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs in how she talked about manipulation like it was an art form. Remember me in my 20s, Max, she'd often reminisce. I had them all wrapped around my finger. One smile, and their wallets would open like magic. The thing is, she wasn't lying about her past beauty. I'd seen the old photos. Daisy in her prime was stunning. The kind of beauty that turned heads and stopped conversations. She'd weaponized it early, learned to use it like a master craftsman uses their tools. I chose to deal with her the only way I knew how, with distance. When she'd start her usual routine about how education was for suckers and how she was smarter than all the working people combined, I'd simply excuse myself from the room. No confrontations, no lectures, no attempts to change her mind. What would have been the point? Running away again, Julia, she'd call after me sometimes. Don't you want to hear about how real women get ahead in life? Max would try to smooth things over, always playing the peacekeeper. She's just joking, Jules, he'd say. You know how she gets when she's had a few drinks. But I knew better. Daisy wasn't joking. That Wednesday started like any other. I was grading papers in the living room while Daisy had dropped by unannounced, as usual, complaining about her latest dating disaster. I'm telling you, Julia, the quality of rich men in this city has really gone downhill, she was saying when my phone rang. The hospital's number flashing on my screen made my heart stop. Mrs. Harrison, the voice on the other end was professionally detached. This is Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in an accident. I don't remember dropping my phone. I just remember Daisy's face changing as she watched my reaction. For once, her usual smirk was gone, replaced by what looked like genuine concern. What is it? What happened to Max? She demanded, grabbing my arm. Hospital, accident, was all I could manage to say. I'm driving, Daisy announced, snatching her car keys. The ride to the hospital was a blur. I kept catching glimpses of Daisy's face in the rearview mirror. She looked agitated, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. The emergency room was chaos, people rushing everywhere, phones ringing, monitors beeping. We ran to the reception desk, both of us talking over each other until the nurse held up her hand to stop us. Mrs. Harrison, she asked, looking at me with those eyes, those terrible, sympathetic eyes that medical staff get when they're about to destroy your world. Please, come with me. The words that followed didn't seem real. Everything possible, massive internal injuries, didn't make it. Each phrase was like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I stood there, frozen, until a clipboard was pushed into my hands. Forms. Always forms. Even when your world is ending, there are forms to fill out. Daisy, I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Could you get Max's things from the administrator? I need to sign these. She nodded, squeezing my arm before heading down the hallway. I spent the next 15 minutes mechanically signing papers, my signature becoming less recognizable with each page. When I finally finished and went to find Daisy, I spotted her in a quiet corner of the waiting room. Something about her movements made me stop. She was hunched over Max's personal effects, but this wasn't the behavior of a grieving sister. Her movements were quick, furtive, like a thief. I instinctively stepped behind a corner, watching as she rifled through my dead husband's wallet. My blood ran cold as I saw her pull out his bank card, glance around nervously, and slip it into her designer handbag. This wasn't just another example of Daisy's moral flexibility, this was something darker, something unforgivable. Standing there in that sterile hospital corridor, watching her tuck away that stolen piece of plastic with practiced ease, I realized I was seeing the real Daisy for the first time. The pieces suddenly clicked into place in my mind. Max's habit of using his father's birthday for all his passwords and pins, a detail Daisy had mocked him about countless times over the years. Really, Max, she'd teased at his last birthday party, watching him punch in the code to his new phone. Still using Dad's birthday for everything? You're so predictable. Now that predictable habit was exactly what she was counting on. My mind raced with the implications of what I'd just witnessed. But I couldn't act rashly, not with something this serious. I needed legal advice, and I knew exactly who to ask. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I stepped out from my hiding place and approached Daisy as if I hadn't seen anything. "Ready to go?" I asked, proud of how steady I kept my voice. "Oh, Jules." Daisy jumped slightly, clutching her bag closer. Yes, let's get out of this awful place." The drive home was surreal. Daisy kept up a stream of apparently concerned chatter, occasionally wiping away tears that never quite seemed to reach her designer mascara. "I just can't believe he's gone," she kept saying. "My little brother, what am I going to do without him? What are you going to do without his money?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I gripped the steering wheel tighter and focused on breathing. As soon as we pulled into my driveway, Daisy's act began to crack. She barely made it through the front door before she started gathering her things. "I'm so sorry, Julia, but I have some really important things I need to take care of," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You understand, don't you? It's just, I need to process this in my own way." "I bet you do," I thought, watching her practically sprint to her car. The screech of her tires on the pavement had barely faded when I grabbed my phone and dialed Jack's number. "Julia," his familiar voice answered on the second ring. "I just heard about Max." "I'm so sorry, I'm already packing to drive down." "Jack," I cut him off, my voice shaking. "Something happened at the hospital. Something you need to know about." I took a deep breath. "It's about Daisy." "What has she done now?" The weariness in his voice told me he was already expecting the worst. "I saw her steal Max's credit card. Right there in the hospital, just minutes after we found out he was." I couldn't finish the sentence. "She thinks she can use it because she knows his PIN." "Jack, I watched your daughter rob her own dead brother." The sound of Jack's heavy sigh through the phone seemed to fill my empty house. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years of disappointment. "Julia," he said slowly, "I've spent my entire career defending people in trouble, but I never thought my own daughter would." He paused, and I could hear him struggling to maintain his composure. "This time she's gone too far. Stealing from her own brother, and not just stealing, doing it while his body was barely cold." "I don't know what to do, Jack," I admitted, sinking into Max's favorite armchair. The leather still held his scent. "First, you need to understand something," Jack's lawyer voice took over. "Legally, you're Max's sole heir. Every account, every asset, it all belongs to you now. But this situation, it's more complicated than simple theft." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "The card she took, it's a credit card, isn't it?" When I confirmed this, he continued, "That makes this much more serious. If she uses that card, she's not just stealing from family, she's committing credit card fraud. That's a federal offense, Julia. She could go to prison for this." The gravity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. "Prison? I hadn't thought about that. My daughter," Jack's voice cracked slightly, "has done many questionable things in her life. I've watched her manipulate and scheme her way through 3 marriages. I've seen her take advantage of Max's generosity time and time again. But this, stealing from her dead brother, she needs to learn a lesson. A real one this time." I twisted my wedding ring nervously. "What should we do?" "Here's what I propose," Jack said after a moment's thought. "We wait 2 weeks. Give her a chance to come to her senses. Maybe she'll realize what she's done. Maybe she'll return the card and beg for forgiveness. If she does that, we can handle this within the family. And if she doesn't? Then we go to the police," he said firmly. "I love my daughter, Julia, but sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their actions. She's my child, but Max was my child too, and what she's done, it's unforgivable." We sat in silence for a moment, both lost in our thoughts. Finally, I asked, 2 weeks then?" 2 weeks, Jack confirmed. But Julia, knowing my daughter, I wouldn't hold my breath for a happy ending. She's never shown remorse before. I doubt she'll start now. The day of Max's funeral was surreal. The church was packed with people whose faces blurred together in my grief. I sat in the front row, numb, while a steady stream of mourners offered their condolences. But what really turned my stomach was Daisy's performance. She had dressed perfectly for the role of the grieving sister: black designer dress, tastefully smudged mascara, a delicate handkerchief that she dabbed at her eyes with theatrical precision. Every few minutes, she would break into fresh sobs, particularly when someone new arrived. "He was the best brother anyone could ask for," she wailed to a group of Max's business associates. "He always took care of me. Always looked out for his big sister. I don't know how I'll go on without him." I caught Jack's eye across the room. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles working beneath his skin. We both watched as Daisy worked the crowd, moving from group to group, sharing tearful stories about her beloved baby brother. "Remember when Max bought me my first car?" she sniffled to one of his old college friends. "That's just the kind of person he was, always giving, always generous." The irony of her words made me feel physically ill. Jack and I maintained our silence, playing our parts in this macabre theater. What choice did we have? We couldn't exactly cause a scene at Max's funeral. The following 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I tried to keep busy with work, but my mind kept drifting to that credit card. Part of me, the part that wanted to believe in basic human decency, hoped that Daisy wouldn't actually use it. Maybe she had just panicked at the hospital. Maybe she'd come to her senses. Maybe she'd return it with an apology. People can surprise you, I told myself late at night, alone in our too-big house. Maybe she's better than we think. Finally, after exactly 14 days, I walked into the bank. The teller's sympathetic smile as she pulled up the account made my heart sink even before she handed me the statement. My hand shook as I read through the transactions. $32,499 at Luxury Motors. $5,000 at Divine Aesthetics Plastic Surgery Consultation. $2,700 at Gucci. $1,850 at Louis Vuitton. $890 at La Maison Restaurant. The list went on and on, each line item a fresh slap in the face. Over $50,000 in total, spent in a 2-week shopping spree that would have made a Kardashian blush. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, staring at the statement until the numbers blurred. Then I pulled out my phone and typed out a text to Daisy. "Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Would love to catch up. Coffee at Riverside Cafe tomorrow at 2?" Her response came almost immediately, "Of course, missing you too." The little heart emoji at the end of her message made my blood boil. I called Jack next. "Did you get the statement?" he asked without preamble. "Yes, I'm meeting her tomorrow at Riverside Cafe. Will you come?" "Try to stop me," he replied grimly. It's time we showed Daisy exactly what kind of hole she's dug for herself. The Riverside Cafe was quiet that afternoon, just a few scattered customers nursing their lattes. I'd chosen a corner table, away from prying eyes and eager ears. Jack sat beside me, his legal notepad placed precisely in front of him, the bank statement tucked underneath. When Daisy swept in, 15 minutes late as usual, she was wearing new clothes I now knew had been purchased with Max's stolen credit card. Her face fell slightly when she saw her father, but she recovered quickly, plastering on her practiced smile. "Daddy, what a surprise," she exclaimed, leaning down to kiss his cheek. He turned his face away. That's when I saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross her features. "Sit down, Daisy," Jack said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the bench. "What's going on?" she asked, sliding into the chair across from us. "Why do I feel like I'm being ambushed?" I took a deep breath. Something happened at the hospital the day Max died. His credit card was stolen. The color drained from Daisy's face, but she recovered quickly. Her eyes went wide with manufactured outrage. Stolen? Oh my God, that's horrible. It must have been one of those shifty doctors or nurses. You can't trust anyone these days. Really, Daisy? I said quietly. That's the story you're going with? What do you mean? Her voice rose an octave. Are you actually suggesting that I would steal from my own brother? On the day he died? How dare you? I loved Max. I would never. Jack cut her off by sliding the bank statement across the table. Then perhaps you'd like to explain how the thief knew to buy exactly your size at Gucci? Or how they knew to make an appointment at your favorite plastic surgeon? Daisy stared at the statement, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, like a cornered animal, she changed tactics. Okay, fine, I took the card. But it was Max's debit card. I'm entitled to some of his money. I'm his sister. I just took what would have come to me anyway. Nothing terrible happened here. Jack slammed his hand on the table, making the coffee cups rattle. Several heads turned our way, but he didn't seem to notice. Nothing terrible? He hissed. Daisy, that wasn't a debit card. It wasn't Max's money you were spending. It was a credit card. Do you understand what that means? You didn't steal from your brother's estate, you committed credit card fraud. That's a federal offense. I watched as the reality of her situation finally began to sink in. The color drained from her face again, but this time it didn't come back. Federal? What do you mean federal? Her voice had lost its defensive edge, replaced by the first real fear I'd ever heard from her. I mean prison time, Jack said flatly. Serious prison time. No, Daisy whispered, shaking her head. No, no, no. Daddy, please. I didn't know. I'll fix it. I'll sell the car. I'll return the clothes. I'll get the money back somehow. Please, you have to help me. You always help me. Not this time, Jack replied, his voice heavy with finality. I've spent your entire life cleaning up your messes. Max spent years supporting you, protecting you, making excuses for you. And how do you repay that loyalty? By stealing from him before his body was even cold. The legal proceedings moved faster than I expected. Within months of filing the police report and contacting the bank's fraud department, Daisy was standing in court, facing the consequences of her actions for the first time in her life. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. She looked small in her navy blue pantsuit, her face bare of makeup, as she stood before the judge. For once, her tears weren't part of an act. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, this wasn't a crime of necessity or desperation. Ms. Harrison stole her deceased brother's credit card within hours of his death, before his body was even cold. She then proceeded to spend over $50,000 in a calculated spending spree, showing complete disregard for both the law and basic human decency. The sentence came down like a hammer, 7 years in federal prison. I watched Daisy collapse into her lawyer's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Part of me wanted to feel something, pity, perhaps, or sadness. But I felt nothing except a grim sense of justice. Late at night, though, when the house is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I sometimes question whether we did the right thing. 7 years is a long time. Did we go too far? Was there another way? But then I remember finding her rifling through Max's wallet in that hospital corridor. I remember how she spent that money without a second thought, shopping, dining, buying a new car while I was planning her brother's funeral. I remember every time Max defended her, supported her, loved her unconditionally, and how she repaid that love with theft and betrayal. In those moments, I know we made the right choice. Some actions can't be excused, some bridges can't be rebuilt, some betrayals cut too deep to heal. Jack and I still meet regularly for Sunday brunches. We rarely talk about Daisy anymore, there's nothing left to say. Instead, we share memories of Max and support each other through the grief. 3 months into her sentence, Daisy called me from prison. The collect call notification gave me pause, but something made me accept it. Julia? Her voice was small, broken. I'm so sorry. Please, I know I messed up. I know what I did was unforgivable. But please, can we talk? I need someone. Everyone has abandoned me. I thought about Max, about his generous heart and forgiving nature. For a moment, I almost wavered. But then I remembered the security footage the police had shown us, Daisy using his credit card at store after store, smiling, laughing, living it up while we grieved. You're right about one thing, Daisy, I said quietly. What you did was unforgivable. Don't call me again. I hung up and blocked the prison's number. Some people say time heals all wounds, that forgiveness sets you free. Maybe they're right. But some betrayals go beyond forgiveness, some actions destroy any possibility of redemption.